The law of conservation of energy states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only converted from one form to another. There is a message of finiteness in this law, just like the limitations on materials around us we use for our energy needs. Is the energy transition, the process of decarbonizing our energy use that we frequently discuss on this podcast, sustainable? To discuss this question on today's podcast, we are joined by Marcel Gauch from the Technology and Society Lab at EMPA, the Swiss Federal Laboratories for Material Science and Technology. Welcome to the Commodity Exchange, a podcast where we bring you insights from the world of commodities. Whether you're an investor or just want to learn more about the topic, this is the podcast for you.
Before we begin, I do need to state the following. To clarify, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of Wisdom Tree and in this episode EMPA and are subject to change. Anything we present in this podcast is not intended to be relied upon as a forecast, research, nor as investment or tax advice. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities, and reliance upon them is at the sole discretion of the listener. Please remember, past performance is no indication of future results. With that said, how about we kick off the conversation? Marcel, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. How about we kick off the conversation by asking you to quickly introduce yourself and your organization. Tell us a bit about EMPA and the sort of work that you do over there.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be part of that podcast. The first timer I am in podcasts, but let's see how this works. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm a researcher at a Swiss Federal Research Institute. We're part of the ETH domain. Many people know the two schools, the technical schools in Switzerland, in Zurich and in Lausanne, ETH Zurich and Lausanne. Among these two schools, we have 4 research institutions. One of them is responsible for research about materials, that is EMPA. But we do not only make research about how to develop batteries or construction materials or make combustion engines better or something. We also try to look at the consequences which these materials or new technologies have on us as humans and for our planet. So we try to involve life cycle assessment considerations from the sourcing of materials to the end of life of the materials, how to keep everything in the loop, and what are emissions during the lifetime, what are possible consequences on society, be it positive or negative, and we will quite quickly probably end up in critical aspects of commodity trading, because this really impacts heavily environmental and social aspects we have to deal with. So that's about it. I personally have been involved quite a bit in biofuels for some time and in mobility, and as a special part of mobility, the batteries. Now, the big questions, we know that we should go to more sustainable energy use, but batteries could be the limiting factor for all this. So we had many years ago already, we wanted to know ourselves. That sounds all nice, but do we shoot ourselves in the knee if we switch over to these modern forms of energy usage and storage?
So I had the pleasure of meeting Marcel in Zurich last month when we co-hosted the Commodity Club in Zurich, an event. He presented on sustainability from an energy and natural resources perspective. I found the presentation absolutely fascinating, and that's why I invited Marcel to join this podcast with us today and share his perspectives with our audience. The opening of your presentation was absolutely fascinating. You had a message about the origins of materials on this world we live in. Um, and I know we don't have the slides in front of us today, but can you walk us through where the materials on this world, the world's assets, so to speak, came from, and how scarce are they?
Yes, that's really a fascinating aspect, which is not covered normally because we think the planet is huge. When we look up to the sky, it looks infinite. And when we look to the ground, we think there is plenty of everything. But once you're zooming a bit out and look at the planet from, just from the moon or so, a bit far away from a satellite's perspective, and you start to calculate a little bit how much is around of everything, you notice that it is way more limited than we think as mere humans. Um, and there's some nice exercises you can do, like trying to calculate how much water do we have available on the planet, how much solid resources do we have, and how much gases resources we have in the form of our atmosphere. And if you make some comparisons size-wise, what this means, you see that this is absolutely way less than we would assume if we never did the exercise to invest a few minutes and do some calculations. And, and that's, of course, for commodities, we're talking about the lithosphere. So the solid part of the Earth crust, we're digging around and extracting stuff from this. And this is quite obvious. That's the interesting thing from a commodities perspective. But a resource is also a resource we are putting our residuals in, like the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is way thinner than we think. It's just a few kilometers up there, and then we're in nothing, no, in the vacuum. And if you see these masses, you can quite exactly calculate how much CO2 or whatever we can push into um, this resource, no, where we're living from. We take our oxygen from it, and just a few minutes are enough, and we would be all dead because it totally depends on it. And although we totally depend on it, we emit all our emissions to this resource, which is a sink. A sink can also be a resource, not just a source. No. With the water, the same thing. We have very limited amount of sweet water available on the planet, but we treat it like if there would be sweet water forever. And sometimes we forget a bit the ecosystem services, which are cleaning up sweet water all the time by evaporation over the oceans. And this is the thing I'm totally obsessed about now, the eco services at the larger scale, which our planet offers to us and which allows humanity to thrive. And that's why I'm totally concerned about anything which puts this system into danger. You know, when you overexploit something, when we overuse something, it's seen from the satellite perspective, it's totally obvious that we run into a one-way street, no? And there is no way out. And our successors of the future will have to live with what is left for them. And we understand more and more how delicate the systems are. And still, we're continuing to deal with resources as if there would be no tomorrow. And that's where our contact comes into place now, because I was also fascinated by my opinion that the world is dominated by the ones who have and the ones who don't have. And the ones who have very often got so rich because they were dealing with resources which in fact should belong to everybody. But just a few have the right or have the power to exploit fossil fuels, exploit metals, and that there has never been a democratic process saying what what is justified? What do we as humanity allow to a few of us to exploit stuff which can be useful for everybody, but it doesn't even have to be useful for everybody? So these relationships of physics, of availability, scarcity, and justice, that's what I'm a bit obsessed with.
Marcel, in your research, you talk about the periodic table in terms of density, noting that the least dense materials are more abundant, while the heaviest are perhaps a bit more scarce. It's a very nice framework to talk about sustainability of our natural resources. How do you think about, because this is a very important topic from our perspective at Wisdom Tree, we offer our clients solutions to invest in the energy transition, and our investors are actually putting their money behind these sorts of technologies. How do you think about traditional energy and how those traditional energy sources fit into the narrative of sustainability or the lack thereof, if you like? And additionally, how do the materials used in the energy transition fit into the sustainability story? And do you believe they actually positively contribute to it?
A super question, and which is partially simple to answer and partially not at all. Like it's totally out of discussion nowadays that we dig out fossil reserves out of the earth crust and burn them, filling up the sink, which is the atmosphere, with the excrements of this usage of fossil energies. That is logical. You could explain this to every child. It's just up to now, the atmosphere has taken up lots of it without two negative reactions for us. That's why we continue doing it. And this system of taking stuff out of the crust and using it somewhere has made governments and people rich. Others stayed poor as always, no? But it is the system which keeps things running is greed, which works brilliantly, but is fundamentally wrong in the topic of something we just burn, and cause problems. The other part of your question is way more interesting. Now to get out of that loop, of that negative spiral, we have options to convert our energy system and everything we use, like houses and streets and everything. If we manage to convert these things, that we don't use critical elements to make them, but if you manage to use what we call elements of hope for these, the ones who are a bit who occur way more frequently in the earth crust, which are not so scarce, which are easier to exploit, which are not toxic, and so then we do something good. Now, for our energy future, what's the options we have now? There are not so many options. It's the usage of solar energy, and solar energy can be appear in the form of wind because of temperature and pressure differences. This causes movement of the atmosphere, and we can move this kinetic energy of the air masses to convert it into electricity with wind turbines. Of course, we can use direct usage of the photons of the sun to convert these into electrons and make electricity, which is my absolute favorite because it's totally unlimited. And the hydro energy option is also a form of solar energy, because solar energy lets water evaporate over the huge surface on the planet is water now, and all this surface water is evaporated, transported over land masses, condenses, falls down in the form of rain, and forms rivers and lakes. So, and this eternal loop is just a miracle, and it works brilliantly. And we can use the water, so the kinetic energy of the water, to have a turbine in the water and convert this mechanical energy into electrical energy. It's just brilliant, and everything is driven by the sun. Now, for the potential to use hydro energy is limited to regions where you have rivers available, no? Or lakes in the Alps, or altitude differences or so. So where it's possible, you should use it. And it's already used quite a bit. In Switzerland, the potential is nearly fully used already now, so it's limited. Wind energy, there's quite a bunch of countries and zones around oceans and so, which have tons of wind and regular wind, morning, evening, and so. So there is quite some space. But what can be used everywhere is solar. And solar using photovoltaic panels is my absolute favorite because when you think about these resources and the periodic table, and you look at what's the element, the main element used in PV, it's silicon. And silicon is the most abundant element in the Earth crust. And it occurs, you have it everywhere. You know? It's the dominant element everywhere on the whole planet in the soil. And if you dig this out, you don't have to have wars or negotiate with your neighbors or so if you want to have silicon. If you want, just dig it out where you are. The problem is the processing to make out of this dirty silicon, which is combined with other elements, to make metallic silicon. This needs some energy and investments and so, but this can be done everywhere. And once you have this metallic silicon, it gets totally absurd and fascinating again, because you can make photovoltaic panels out of it. You can make computer chips out of it. And if you have silicon oxidized, silicon dioxide, this is glass. These are our windows. So the same element as we have in our cell phones, the same element as we have in our photovoltaic panels, we look through this when we look outside. Silicon is my absolute favorite besides carbon, which is equally interesting. But silicon is a very interesting way to go. And by coincidence, the photovoltaic cells nowadays produced are 99 point something percent is silicon. Available everywhere, no wars, no scarcity problems. It's an abundance of it. So why shouldn't you be fascinated by such facts? But as an investor, something which is available everywhere, and you don't have to have wars for it, that's not interesting for an investor because it's cheap. So that's a bit the conflict, I see. And one of the reasons why in the commodity club we have been discussing these things, that very often things which are in favor of humanity are not in favor of individuals because they can't get money out of it.
So,
Probably today's discussion.
yeah, so Marcel, it's clear that solar is your favorite technology from the elements of good hope usage. But what other sustainable technologies are there out there, like the heat storage or your pump water? Tell us a little about those. To what degree are they using the elements of good hope, and what's the prospects for those to prosper in this transition?
That's right. As renewable energies are intermittent, we need storage options. So in the same breath as you mention PV, we should also mention storage. And what comes to our minds for electricity storage is store electrons, store electricity directly, and this is done in the form of batteries. But I just mentioned also in my talk that it doesn't have to be like this. Now we can also have our future, hopefully someday, excess renewable energy and convert it into other energy forms like just heat. Because in northern countries we need heat in wintertime. We don't need more electricity. We need heat. So why not put it aside as heat and not in form of batteries? If we do this, batteries need quite a bit of metals and energy to produce them. they're heavy, they're resource intense. So if we can find other ways than batteries, we can do this. But batteries have a huge advantage for short-term energy storage, like day, night, and shift a few hours or so. They're super duper efficient. You lose hardly any energy by putting solar energy, electricity at midday into the batteries, and at night you can use them. And that's why we see these huge growth rates for grid storage batteries, like in the US or in China. We see huge increase of big plants for direct electricity storage with batteries. I find that interesting. What is then to consider is if you can manage to make batteries also with a huge part of elements of hope, that would be very nice, no? So no cobalt discussions, no nickel discussions, and that would be very favorable for us as humans. No? But even if you use the technology we know for now, including nickel and cobalt and that thing, it's already so good, in my opinion, the technology, that it's way better than the alternative. And the alternative, we're back to fossil fuels. And this should be clear to everybody now that this is, even if you have to invest in photovoltaics and in storage systems, even then, from a sustainability perspective, you have to do it. You know? It's never an excuse to use fossil fuels anymore, because if you burn them, they're away. And if you produce PV and storage, the elements are still there. They might even be there in a concentrated form, no? Where our successors can use them again. No? Reconvert the batteries and make new batteries out of them with the technology status in 20 years or so. So this is the loop thinking, the circularity thinking. It's not lost as we're used to today. It's a real investment of elements to build something useful, and we have to take care not to lose it. No? Once we've taken it out of the earth crust, we converted it into something useful for us and even future generations. We really have to take care to make a brilliant recycling, you know? Avoiding that we have to dig out more and more and more from mines. So the commodity thinking more in the sense of not a one-way train from the mine to, I don't know, landfill. No, so this is just take it out once, and the investment includes taking it in the loop and do something useful even in 1,000 years from now on.
Speaking of energy storage, Marcel, particularly you made the distinction between short and long duration energy storage. How do you see the hydrogen market? We know that green hydrogen, particularly, is seeing a lot of interest in our world through our lens in the investment world, getting a lot of investment in terms of both the generation of green hydrogen, but also its use in different applications. We see news coming out from the likes of Airbus, who have said that they want to fly a commercial airliner on hydrogen by 2035. So it's very interesting that hydrogen is being seen as a potential fuel source for all of these different applications, transportation, and a source of a way to store energy from renewables. So, store it in the form of hydrogen where batteries might not work, or maybe this complements batteries for longer duration storage. So, what's your view on hydrogen from a scientific perspective, and what do you think is the potential and what lies ahead?
This is a bit of a difficult question because among researchers, we do not have one opinion. In research, there are tons of fans for H2 research because it's a fascinating element, no? Hydrogen. You can do a lot with it. It's very versatile. And there is a ton of funding behind all the research. That's why even researchers follow the money. But my personal opinion is a bit, it's difficult. It's different. In most of the cases, I find this hydrogen hype is a distraction from the things we should do now. It's just maintaining it. It leads to maintaining the system as it is, because it's technology which comes in 20 years now, since decades. And the problem is not the hydrogen. Hydrogen is useful and will be needed, is urgently needed for various sectors in industry, like steel production or as a basic material for chemistry and so. So hydrogen, way more hydrogen than today, has to come. And now there comes the point, it absolutely has to be produced out of renewable energy. Just this steam reforming thing of natural gas is so bad. It's the stupidest thing you can do because you always lose energy. As Nitesh has said at the beginning, no energy can be converted, but you never get more out of it than you invested in it. So the chain of efficiency degrades when you work with hydrogen. So you have to produce the hydrogen with renewable energy. But if you do this and you have all the losses in the processing steps, the energy is missing for our daily lives, no? For our heat pumps, for our television and everything. No? This is missing then. So we should not afford hydrogen before we have tons of excess of renewable energy thanks to photovoltaics, wind, and hydro. Then we can start to wasting it and play around and putting it aside for winter and so. But first, we need to build up the infrastructure to produce the energy and store the energy. And then comes the second step with where we can play with hydrogen. And what I always say for low purposes, simple tasks like driving around on solid ground, don't even think about it. It's just a waste of energy. For difficult tasks, the high-hanging fruits, like airplanes, yes, there you can think about it. No? But do not talk to me about cars, hydrogen cars. For me, it's just a waste of energy, which I know or I feel, or I've even seen in one of your podcasts before. Of course, many investors are thinking about this hydrogen economy and all the the heavy elements, no, the precious ones, the scarce ones. And of course, this is very promising as an investor to go in there and hope that there will be a boom of hydrogen. So we need tons of fuel cells. And of course, the logical consequence would be that palladium and platinum prices and so will go up. But that would, yeah, that's again the conflict for me between interest of society and the interest of individuals.
Well, so talking about an element that's pretty much on the heaviest end of the spectrum, uranium. It clearly has a big role in nuclear. Could you offer your opinion on whether nuclear fits into an energy transition or not?
I always wonder why people come up with uranium as and they treat it like a renewable energy. Of course, it's not renewable. It's an element which is used up, and the effort to dig it out and to process this into being capable for nuclear power plants, that's a huge amount of effort you have to do. And we know from the sources of uranium up to now and in the future, it's not a clean business. It's Switzerland, for instance, has often claimed, or still claims, nuke is nice and low CO2 and so. But the life cycle assessments of nuclear power plants have been made with the assumption, which was right at the time, that we were recycling weapons, nuclear weapons. No? During the Cold War, we had tons of nuke stuff around, no? And the decommissioning of these nuclear weapons led to huge available amounts of uranium. So we recycled the uranium, which was something good, no, at the time. But nowadays, people start again to build new nuclear weapons. So it has to be digged out of the crust again. It has to be processed, and there's a ton of energy behind. So the CO2 emissions are way worse than appear when you study the old works. And nobody is doing new work about hypothetical nowadays effort to produce uranium. And of course, besides uranium, which is not many kilos, but these kilos have high amounts of CO2. But you have to build the huge infrastructure for the nuke plants. And we all know how much time it takes nowadays, how much it costs, overshooting of cost. And so it's just, for me, I cannot understand why this fascinating power of atoms still is so much in the heads, and so many people want to get back to these nuke times and condemn all the renewable energy options, although it's also very clear that it's even cheaper. No? Nowadays, it's totally obvious that PV and storage options are cheaper. You can build them in a few years. And for nuke, you have to 20 years time until the first plans to the commissioning and so. And still, you can't get rid of this. That's interesting. So, yeah, I think that makes the thing clear. I cannot understand why we should waste our time with nuke discussions now that we have that status of the technology for solar, wind, hydro, and storage options.
And what about your take on biofuels? I know you mentioned in your introduction it's an area that you've focused on, especially if we talk about making biofuels from, landfill emissions and taking waste and generating fuels out of it. What's your take there?
It's relatively simple. All our work and experience has shown that you should never touch land to produce plants and make something out of these plants. Plants are for human nutrition and for birds and animals living in the forest and to keep our climate in balance and so. But there's a ton of organic waste around from nutrition or from water treatment plants or so, where you can have methane and then use this methane. That's so interesting that I would even say absolutely use it. No? So that makes the message a bit complicated. No? This distinguishment of it depends where the organic material comes from. And when it comes from waste, then it's so interesting that you should use it. And when it doesn't come from waste, don't touch it. It's the wrong way.
So when it comes to batteries, and I know you've kind of touched on this earlier, there is a huge transition in technology out there. The technology is constantly evolving. Um, you talked about some of the battery technologies that use nickel and cobalt, but there are newer technologies, or maybe slightly inferior from an energy density perspective, like lithium iron phosphate batteries. Um, is the transition to, say, lithium iron phosphate, which China seems to be leading on, a good thing? And are there any other technologies of that same dimension that are going to help propel the uses of batteries?
Absolutely. For me, for huge storage, grid storage, I think nobody nowadays uses NMC, so nickel, manganese, cobalt stuff anymore. I think this game is over. It's LFP, iron phosphate, which is a very nice progress, very good in terms of sustainability. So that's really good. And the next step, which comes very quickly now, in my opinion, is sodium ion batteries, which offer even another step in sustainability progress. And all this is combined with new production methods, which allow the production of batteries without that traditional thing of producing a slurry, mixing different elements, and applying them to metal foils, aluminium or copper, and drying it again with solvent recovery plants and so, which everything takes up investment cost, a ton of energy for the drying process, and so it makes the the industry bigger, the surface demand of the battery companies, factories. So if it goes further on, as we see already it now for modern plants, that you can use elements which are more abundant, which are cheaper, which are less or absolutely non-toxic, and the companies get cheaper, the battery prices will go down even more, and the materials are harmless. Again, something, a relatively clear trend. And if you see that trend, and you have the other world, the defenders of the old system like oil and gas in mind, how can you still defend such a thing if it's here, the new thing? No, it's not produced in masses still, but it's clear that the trend goes into a direction which is getting better and better, and not that we burn more and more oil, so there's less and less gas. The same thing, dependence of strange countries. No, sometimes we really shouldn't stick to dealing with some of these countries where the fossil energies come from. So if you see the both sides of the medal, it's clear which side I choose.
Marcel, of course, it's clear that you are very constructive on renewables. We know that if we want to build those wind turbines, we need large quantities of copper and zinc and so forth. Uh, Building renewables requires more metals. Making those batteries, like you said, is very resource intensive. So there is a need for us to mine more of these materials in order to meet the requirements of all the clean applications that we want to build. So in the first instance, until we scale up our recycling industry to a level where we satiate more of the demand from recycled metal, in the first instance we have to mine more. How do you square that conversation about uh, the importance that yes, mining has a certain footprint. It's a necessary cost that we must pay for the greater good. Can we change the perception around mining, especially when it comes to these very important materials in the energy transition?
I'm glad that you asked, because probably I sounded a bit negative up to now, but for mining and commodities and everything. But I really feel that the commodity sector has a huge and important role to allow for that transition. No? We have to dig out the stuff now, because we cannot recycle existing things. It's just not enough around. No? We can partially recycle things, as some studies we do here show. Like steel is simple, because the uh, the oil and gas industry, which will become obsolete, mainly depending on steel. So there is quite a bunch of steel around already exploited and available. We can use that. But we don't have enough silicon. Don't have maybe enough aluminium if we work with the frames, or for silver for the connectors. And so there I see that we have to invest, dig out the stuff, keep it invested in useful products, and try not to lose it. So that's an important fact of the commodity industry, where it's right to invest people's money into these sectors, because this allows for the conversion to a better world. So yeah, we were also talking in our event about this now, where to invest, or where is it justified to invest? where is it right and okay for the whole humanity to dig out stuff and make something useful out of it? Where is it okay that people even get enough money for doing all the work to process it and dig it out and trade it? I find this is, I'm not a fundamentalist. No, I allow for a big bunch of capitalism in sectors where we agree on it, that it is useful and doesn't make just a few people rich and damage the planet, but where it makes everybody a bit of a better place for everybody. Some people have also absolutely the right to get a bit richer.
Thank you, Marcel, for sharing your valuable insights with us. Please do let our audience know where they can read more of your material and follow you.
So the things I have shown in the presentation, they can be shared easily. That's no problem. We didn't publish scientifically about these specific things. We published about individual smaller things, and we're just in the process with a bunch of nice work dealing with what should be invested now and how to invest and how do we manage to make the transfer to renewable energy, including these aspects of maybe repurposing fossil infrastructure to renewable infrastructure. That's ongoing, not just ready yet, but in a few months that will also be scientifically published and be available for everybody.
That's excellent. Well, great. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We hope you really enjoyed today's episode of the Commodity Exchange. If you do want to hear more from us at Wisdom Tree, please do subscribe on whichever platform you're using, Spotify, YouTube, Apple. You can also follow me on X, formerly Twitter, with the handle at NiteshWT, and Mobeen on at MobeenTahirWT. And if you want to learn more about commodities, please do visit Wisdom Tree's website, where we have a wide range of research material and insights. Until next time.